In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the material library from inside of BobCAM for SolidWorks. So once again, you can find the material library. The easiest way is by going to the CAM tree tab here and then right-clicking on CAM defaults, and we can go down to our material library. Now inside the material library, on the left we'll see the material groups. So we have alloy steel, aluminum, carbon steel, cast iron, copper alloy, magnesium. Miscellaneous is where you're going to find brass, bronze, graphite, nickel. Some old cutting conditions. These are from an old version of BobCAD. We have plastic, stainless steel, super alloys, titanium, and tool steel. So first you pick your material group. So I'm going to go to aluminum. Now when we click on aluminum, we then go to our material list. Now through the material list, we'll see all the different types of aluminum that I can choose. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find this 6061 T6. If you're looking for any other kind, just keep scrolling and eventually you will find it. There's a pretty good list in here. Now that's not to say that every material is in here automatically. If we look over here on the left, there is no category for wood. So we could go in and add a category for wood if we were going to be machining some. So with this 6061 right here, if this is the material I use the most often, the best thing to do is say set that as my default. So I can just click that, and that is going to set that material as the default. Now right here, we also have an option to move to favorites, and you'll notice we don't have a favorites folder here on the left. But if I was to pick a material and say I cut this often enough that I don't want to have to scroll through this entire list of materials to find it, what we can do is just click on it once and say move to favorites. And that's going to create a favorites folder, and it's going to move that material into there. Just be aware that it's no longer going to be listed on this page anymore. So you're going to have to make sure you remember that you put it inside your favorites folder. Now in the material group, if we decided we wanted to add more materials, we can come over here and add a group. So I'm going to say add group, and I'm just going to call this group wood. And I'm going to hit OK. Now there's no materials by default because I haven't added any materials. Now to add a material, down at the bottom we could say add material. Now when this shows up, we first want to go ahead and name our stock material. So I'm just going to call this maple. And with wood, it's not really a big deal what you choose. It's kind of really, you could make a generic one that just says wood, or maybe softwood versus hardwood, because you might have some differences in those. But even then, it's going to be minor differences for the most part. Now over here on the left, we list out what tool materials are currently available for this feature. So it by default creates just a high-speed steel option. But I could come in and say add new tool material, and I could call this carbide. And then I can hit OK. Now what this does is if I'm using a high-speed steel tool, I can go and define the surface footage per minute, the surface footage while tapping, the chip load per flute, and the plunge chip load. And these would be the values I could run anytime I use a high-speed steel tool. But if I go down to carbide, I can go in and say that the surface footage is a lot higher. I can go a lot faster. So I'll say this one's 250 surface feet per minute. And the chip load is 0.006 for the chip load. So now when I go in and I create a job and I pick a tool that has carbide listed as its material, it's going to pull the values from this set of options instead of the high-speed steel set of options. We also could go in and set up customized feeds and speeds based on the tool type and operation. So what this means is if I'm using an end mill rough to do a rough cut, I can set up a specific set of feeds and speeds. If I'm using an end mill finish on a rough cut, I can use a specific set of feeds and speeds. So you'll see we're able to lower down our chip load per flute and our plunge chip load to really give us a better cut with that finish tool. And then we go back and we say, well, you can use an end mill rough for our finish passes or an end mill finish for our finish pass. Again, you're just setting up your surface footage, your chip load per flute, and your plunge chip load specific to the tool you're using. Or if you're going to manually enter in your feed rates, your spindle RPM, your cutting feed rate, and your plunge feed rate, you really don't have to worry about the material library at all. I do like to make sure that it shows up with the correct material selected. So I can go down to aluminum, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick that 6061 once again, and then hit OK. Now if I go in and I start a new job, and I say I'm milling, and I just hit OK, if I expand where it says the word stock inside of here, I can actually see what material is currently chosen. If I right click on that and say edit, I can go down to wood, I can pick my maple, I can hit OK, and it's going to automatically update that stock material. Now, the big thing to remember here is if you're using high-speed steel, you're going to want to make sure your tool shows up as high-speed steel. If you're using carbide, make sure it shows up as carbide. That is how we calculate the feeds and speeds. If you're not letting us calculate the feeds and speeds, again, because you have a program or something that runs those feeds and speeds so you get a good idea of how it's all going to run, then you really don't have to worry about the material. I would still make sure that you have the right material listed, because later on we'll get to see a setup sheet, and inside the setup sheets we get to see what materials chosen, what feeds and speeds were chosen, what cycle time we have. It actually gives us a lot of information. So after we have it picked, we just hit OK, and now we'll see we're back to that 6061 T6. And all the tools I'm using, if I set up my tool crib, are going to be either high-speed steel, carbide, or insert. So they're going to, when they get chosen, going to use different feeds and speeds based on their material. And that's the biggest thing. Make sure if you're using a carbide tool, make sure to list it as carbide so we know where to grab those values from. And that concludes the video on the material library from inside of BobCAM for SOLIDWORKS.